Hello. Today is Thursday, October 30th, 2025. My name is Anna Portillo, and I am in Blacksburg, Virginia at Virginia Tech University Libraries. Joining me today for an oral history interview is
Julianna Byrd.
and sorry. Assisting me is Sean Chambers, a PhD student at Virginia Tech. This interview is a part of the Pride Stories Oral History Project with LGBTQ alumni from Virginia Tech. So thank you for, oh yes. And with Camila, who is also a digital humanities intern, as I am as well, with Dr. Jason Higgins. So thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely happy to be here.
Yes. Do I have your consent to record this interview?
You do.
Okay, amazing. Also, just as a reminder, you don't have to answer anything that you don't want to, and we can stop, pause, or take a break at any time. So just feel free. And then you will also have the opportunity to review all of the recorded materials and look over everything. So we will let you know when that happens.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with, where are you from?
So I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and grew up in a variety of places, Pennsylvania, as well as spent about 10 years in Virginia right after we ended up here at Virginia Tech. But now I currently call Ellicott City, Maryland home, which is a suburb of Baltimore City.
Awesome. Amazing. Can you tell me a little bit about your family and your parents?
Absolutely. So I am married. My partner is Todd, who is also an alumni from Virginia Tech. And then I have a son who just graduated in May of 2025 from Virginia Tech,
Wow.
Joshua, and he's now working his first job in Roanoke, Virginia.
That's amazing. What did he major in?
He majored in, and I have to think about it a little bit, his major was environmental conservation and society with a minor in biodiversity conservation.
Wow, that's very impressive. I'm very happy to see that your son has graduated.
Yes, and employed already.
Yeah.
And employed doing what he wants to do
Yes.
and loves to do.
That's very important. I'm really glad. So I know that earlier you had mentioned that you're the youngest of 12. Do you mind speaking on how that's kind of impacted how you are today?
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that because this actually came up during a speech I did last year. So I am the youngest of 12. It's 6 boys, 6 girls. And from a childhood and what that was like, my father was a violent alcoholic until I was about 12 or 13, and my mother suffered from untreated mental illness her entire life. So, from the time I was about 9 years old, I was raising myself functionally. By the time I was 20, I was actually financially supporting them while attending Virginia Tech full time and working 3 jobs.
Wow.
So I learned very early on independence to count on myself, and that the experiences that I was having as an adult and as a child were going to be very different than a lot of other people.
Wow, that's very impressive. Do you mind telling me a little bit of how growing up in your town is like?
So I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, right over the Maryland, Pennsylvania line. We moved from Baltimore when I was about 2 years old. And the town that I grew up in was very, very small. People always commented that I had a very odd accent. I didn't sound like I was from there.
Really?
And then if I went to Baltimore, they'd say, "You have a really odd accent. Where are you from?" So growing up, it was very rural, very focused on independence and self-reliance, but also very community focused. So when things went wrong in the community, people helped each other out. So it was fascinating to grow up in an experience where I grew up on a farm and in rural America, but most of my extended family was still in either suburbs or cities. It gave me a very unique perspective of the challenges in each space.
Yeah, and especially kind of connecting back to what you said about having to be independent at a very young age. It's it's very interesting to see how that plays into how your surroundings were as well in your community.
Absolutely.
So what did young people do for fun when you were growing up?
So that's an interesting question. So because of my family history, I didn't do a whole lot other than either stay at the house and do stuff on the farm or was in class. So what I did for fun is I read. I read constantly. I biked. We luckily had some friends that were relatively close by that were somewhere within 5 years of my age. So got to play with them a lot and spent a lot of days and a lot of nights at other people's houses.
What kind of books did you like to read?
So to give you an idea about me, because I didn't really do anything, I actually in elementary school started to volunteer at the school library, and I made it my mission to read every book in the library. And so that meant that by fourth grade, I had read but did not understand the complete works of William Shakespeare.
Wow.
Didn't understand what I was reading, but I was committed to reading every single word in every single page and every single book in the library.
Very determined.
Yes. So my reading everywhere, all over the gamut. I read anything from nonfiction to fiction, fantasy, anything.
Gotcha. And then what was school like for you? Kind of like growing up.
So where I grew up, kindergarten was not mandatory. So I went to first grade not knowing my ABCs or colors even, because there just was no investment in education in our family. And so once I got there and it became an opportunity, I read everything under the sun. I was like, if you are familiar with Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, I was the kid that read the entire textbook by the end of the first week of school for every single class I had.
Wow.
I might not understand it, but I read it.
How did you receive any like support from your siblings when it comes to like education?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So all of my siblings helped as far as exposing me to things, also taking me, because the age difference is 23 years between my oldest sister and myself. I ended up having opportunities where that was like the place where I would go sometimes for the night, sometimes for the weekend, sometimes for several weeks at a time to escape the home environment. And I had a sister who actually took money from her babysitting and offer every time I finished a book, she would buy the book for me. So she would show me a book in the used book section at our public library. And if I read the whole thing to her, then I could keep the book. So that was a fantastic incentive as I was just learning how to read, because she didn't realize I didn't know my alphabet when I went to first grade, and she was absolutely appalled. So here she is as an 11-year-old going and trying to buy me books.
Wow. So kind of related to that, did you have any mentors or role models growing up and into your early like college experience?
Absolutely. So a lot of the teachers, a lot of the teachers, particularly my English teacher in high school, she got me interested in journalism. So I ended up being part of the school newspaper. She kept on recommending other things to me, and she encouraged me to explore whatever it is that I wanted to do. She volunteered to actually be the academic advisor for me, but then also she volunteered to be the advisor for an environmental society that I and three other kids founded at my high school.
Wow. What was your choice like to pursue that, founding the environmental society?
So environment was always important to me. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, which meant everybody was talking about the ozone layer. And everybody was talking about banning some of the chemicals that were harming the ozone layer. So that became my quest when I was in high school, was to ban things like the styrofoam containers at lunch, and to raise awareness. By this point, we were living in Ocean City, Maryland, so you could see firsthand the impacts of coastal erosion and flooding. So that became very important for me, and so I and a couple other friends said, you know what, we don't have an environmental group at high school, let's do it.
Can you tell me a little bit about seeing the effects of like the impacts of like global warming and the ozone like erosion you mentioned?
So it's funny because a lot of people talk about how Gen Z doesn't do anything and they don't care, but we took care of the hole in the ozone. It was absolutely fantastic. So the club that we founded ended up convincing the county school to ban styrofoam and bring trays that could be washed and dishwashers, even though it was more expensive. So that was my very first experience with, though we are small, we are mighty. And it is on us to try to change things that don't work for us in society.
Mm-hmm. Um, did you end up taking that mindset into your advocacy when it comes to being an LGBTQ individual?
100%. And I think a lot of it, so my father was a contradiction. So while he was a man with a drinking problem and a anger problem, he also was a deacon in the church that we were raised in. And he was a very much an early adopter of civil rights from an activism perspective when he got back from World War II. So it was this fascinating dichotomy where I always grew up with, you were expected to make a difference in the world. And that is how I changed and thought about everything. But in particular for LGBTQ plus, when I went to Virginia Tech, I had no idea that I was bisexual because in my world that didn't exist. You were either gay or you were lesbian. And there were no in-betweens. So it was actually after college, probably about 2 years after college, that I went, wait a second, isn't everybody equally attracted to everybody else? This is really odd. And so I applied my thinking around LGBTQ plus and trans kids the same way I applied to everything else. And that shaped my thinking. The other thing that shaped my thinking, and if I tear up, I always tear up. So my son was very good friends with a kid who, in the 2016 election, was put on a 24/7 suicide watch. And nobody could understand why this kid was so upset. And the reason he was so upset is because he knew that Mike Pence was vice president. And he had a secret because he wasn't a lesbian, he was a man. And it took about 6 months for this kid to have friends. Every time he went to the bathroom, they were with him. Anytime he was going to a class, there was a friend with him. 24/7, he was never alone. And watching what he went through and watching what his mom went through, because he did not have a supportive father. There were threats made of forced conversion therapy. And to watch this kid get the support he needed to be his true, authentic self and to thrive was absolutely an incredible life-changing experience. And so when I think about queer and trans students and why I invest so much here at Tech is because there are pockets that are so marginalized and so mistreated and misunderstood. And it is very important to me to try to be there for them when, and many times, the people in their life are not.
That's amazing. I think especially my experience with Virginia Tech is community has such a difference in how you're able to feel more comfortable with yourself and live and thrive, as you mentioned. So I really appreciate you sharing that and continuing to support students.
Absolutely. So I worked at a company once that very early on adopted the bring your whole self to work concept. And because of that, it helped me understand that in the world you're going to meet people who are in various journeys, whatever their journey is. And being sure that we accept people and get rid of the noise and the constant struggle and the covering behaviors that they need to do. You encourage not only so much, if you're in a work environment, so much better performance and so much more effective people, but it bleeds everywhere. So the more that I can help target my giving here and my advocacy here at Tech to helping people be their true authentic selves, that's what wakes me up every day and gets me my job in corporate America. Is my corporate America job is funding, trying to make a difference in the world.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about, I think you mentioned having a scholarship, or talking a little bit about how you support queer students and queer
Sure.
kids?
So I support a couple of different groups here at Tech. So the first one is with the scholarship that focuses on first generation students. I know what that was like. And when I was here at Virginia Tech, there was no consideration for what it was like to be first generation. For me, neither of my parents graduated high school, let alone college. So I truly had to figure things out for myself. So that's one of the things that I sponsor. I have a student that's about to graduate that I've been supporting her for the past several years, and she's about to graduate from the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences. And so I do that. And then about 3 years ago, 3 years ago, I created a dedicated fund for the Pride Center, and it's called the Byrd Family Safe Haven Fund. And it is an unrestricted fund that is dedicated to whatever the Pride Center needs. I have no restrictions on how they spend any money, but it needs to be spent on bettering the lives of the students that are here at Virginia Tech. So it was very important to me to set up a dedicated fund so that even in the future, if funding was cut because of external impacts from other parts into Virginia Tech, that there would still be a source of funding for the Pride Center, and more importantly for kids at Virginia Tech, because this is the time period where they are figuring out who they are, they're figuring out what they believe, they need the support. So it has been a very satisfying, and particularly in the past year, an incredibly rewarding experience to know that no matter what, there are kids that are going to benefit here from these dedicated funds.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know, especially because throughout like my time at Virginia Tech, the Pride Center has been a wonderful resource that has allowed me to find community. And especially in this past year, with that being threatened, it's very comforting for me to know that there is support by you. It's very honorable.
I think it's important. So, and I have friends that also went to Virginia Tech, and there were periods that were dark periods. And so I talked to alumni, honestly, up to about 2010, that they do not have happy memories of being here at Virginia Tech. And what is important to me is I saw some of the struggles because some of my very close friends while I was at Tech identified as gay or lesbian. And I watched some of the struggles they went through, as well as people who just seemed odd and different. So they were classified as gay or lesbian, whether or not they were. So having that experience, it is, I believe, my mission to help the next generation. And that, like, we have to live our school motto. We serve. And that's why it is so important to me to give to these various areas. And I'll continue to give to Virginia Tech because if we don't fund where there are gaps from external sources, no one will. We have to be the bridge that helps the next generation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's very powerful. Do you mind talking a little bit about how hearing from your peers, you especially having close friends that were queer, and seeing what kind of struggles that they went through, how did that change your perspective?
It made me much more empathetic and also angry. And I balance that to this day, where I recognize that tech is right now in a terrible situation, but talking to my alumni friends who were just starting to consider that maybe tech had changed, that maybe there were places for queer and trans students here, and then to have Lavender House get disbanded at the end of this year, it's hard. So part of the reason, I'm also part of the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences Dean's Advisory Roundtable. And part of the reason I joined this past summer is, as alumni, we have to be in the room and we have to advocate what we believe. And if we believe that there is a practice or things that are happening that is not right for our underlying, what the university motto is, it does not say that I may serve certain students. It says that I may serve. And as an alumni, I also have the ability to sometimes say the uncomfortable things that faculty, staff, and administrators can't say. And that's why it's so incredibly important to me to be an advocate to alumni who have concerns. I will be honest with you, when the announcement was made about Lavender House, I had 10 alumni reach out to me and say, should I stop giving at Virginia Tech? And there was crickets from the university. So it is on me as an alumni to help bridge that gap and say, look, I know the university is doing things that you do not like. Put your money where it matters. If you feel strongly about Black students and you are upset about Ijima, donate to the Black Cultural Center. Donate to the Pride Center. Donate for what you believe needs to exist at Virginia Tech, no matter what.
Yeah. I know, especially when it was first announced that these communities were under fire, it felt so hopeless as students, especially because often you can feel like you don't have power to change anything. So I feel like that's incredibly valuable that you are doing that work. So thank you.
So it's funny you say that about hope, because that was actually one of the big themes of my commencement speech this past May. One of the quotes that was the inspiration for my speech actually comes from a movie, Rogue One, which is rebellions, and I will probably misquote it, but rebellions are built on hope. We cannot lose hope in times where it may feel like Pride and other places within Virginia Tech is under attack. We have to get out there. We have to ensure that our voices are heard. And we will not give up our joy and our hope, because just being joyful and hopeful at times is an act of rebellion. And that was part of my message to the students this past year, is there are so many challenges and we could get bogged down, but no one is going to come to save us. We need to save ourselves. And in order to save ourselves, we have to believe in a better future. We have to believe in a better tomorrow. And then we have to work to create it and call it into being. So it was hard, but this is also, you're seeing places where communities coming together, where community got complacent because things were getting better or things were good. Well, we've gotten a reminder of, we need to support our community. We need to support our students. And what is it that really matters?
That's beautiful. I think especially with that, I would love to hear more from your commencement speech.
Absolutely. So I had 5 themes, and I'm going to pull my glasses here. I had 5 main themes because I've been out, and one of the first places I wanted to start was saying that these aren't normal times, but to recognize we are living history right now, and particularly for the kids that are graduating right now, they've never had normal times. They were born in the ashes of 9/11. They watched their families, when they were little kids, go through the Great Recession. From elementary through high school, they endured school shooting after school shooting, and the only comfort or message that they got from parents was thoughts and prayers. And so this generation, and these kids in particular, they've persevered and they've survived. And so that's one of the things I talked about was in my speech, was recognizing not only where they were and seeing that things have never been normal for them. And it will still not be normal for them. They are living in unprecedented times, and we would all love to live in precedented times at this point. But my messages were around 5 key themes. The first one was that, number one, they're going to come across assholes. And so I shared some of the stories that I had early on when I was interviewing for my first job. And the person who interviewed me told me he didn't think I was qualified for the position because only men had held that position before. And so instead offered me a position in HR because that was a good place for women. So I shared that. I shared that you have a community. And if you don't see a community that you need to build it. The most important thing for me was everybody that was in that room hearing the commencement speech, they had a lived experience that nobody else had. They need to bring that voice. One of the things that I had shared was that when I first went to my first job in corporate America, I was literally the only person in the room with a sort of background of poor. And not poor. I was the only one in the room that had gone to bed hungry regularly at night. I was the only liberal arts major with my peers, but fascinatingly enough, not with all the executives, because most of the executives at all the financial firms I've worked at have had at least one liberal arts degree. But when I was in the room, they were all finance and economics and math and business. But because my childhood, I had always been thought of as the odd person out, and the experiences I had were never similar to my peers. As a result, I just spoke up because I thought people were going to look at me weird no matter what, so I may as well just speak up. And that was one of the things I encourage the kids to do, is to speak up and be their full authentic selves, because they have experiences that can add to the solutions that the business community doesn't even realize that there are solutions. The other thing I talked about was a role model. And I talked about my role model, who is Nelson Mandela. And I talked about the fact that my favorite quote, which was so important for the Lavender House students to hear, is my favorite quote from Nelson Mandela is, "During my life, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." And I talked about how for people in our community, the queer and trans community, if we are not having the conversations, the hard conversations, and looking for common ground, we will never have a seat at the table. So I talked about that, but most importantly, I talked about hope. My final thing is refuse to let hope die. And one of the things I talked about, because I think it's lost, is 20 years ago, 2003, when all of those graduates, most of them had been born, was the year that Lawrence v. Texas overturned on the nationwide level, banning homosexual acts. But it took Virginia until 2014, 11 years later, to remove that law off the books. So when my child was born, who was sitting in the room for the ceremony, I spent 11 years with my child, and in the back of my head wondering, is someone going to one day try to take my child away because I happen to be gay? And that he was only 21 at the time. The window was so short. So don't lose sight of the fact that generally the arc slowly ramps, sometimes quickly ramps, to justice. And any time before a leap forward, there is always a backlash. To not lose hope, to continue to be themselves, to celebrate, because the community, and it is anybody that's part of the community and cultural centers, anybody who is in a different circumstance than the majority. We have to be the activists, sometimes the dissidents, and sometimes the very act of us existing is rebellion and progress. And so one of the things that I ended with the speech was in the 1990s, in queer activists, there was an expression, we're here, we're queer, deal with it. My message for the 2025 Lavender House students was, we're here, we're queer, get out of our way and watch us soar. And it was so incredibly inspiring to hear the stories and to watch this community come together to create a space where they could celebrate.
That's so beautiful. I think it's really valuable to hear that from a queer elder because I have never known queer elders and I've never seen the success of people having, like, being able to live their full authentic self. And so it's really awesome to hear you say that.
It is. And also what's fascinating is, so my son also is queer. But he grew up in a fantastic bubble. So when he came to Virginia Tech, he was like, people actually care whether their roommates are queer or straight. Like, this is just weird to me. So my son was in this bubble where it never actually existed, where he wasn't accepted. And that's what one of the both fascinating and also frustrating at times things of being at Tech is because we have such a diverse population. We don't necessarily talk about the differences and how jarring it can be, regardless of where you're coming from, to experience life at Tech. One of the things that was hard for him is we lived in Baltimore City. And when people would talk to him, there's coded language, even here at Virginia Tech, and especially in the surrounding area. And he couldn't understand why Black people were supposed to be so scary. And it was absolutely fascinating watching his world expand because his mayor was Black. His mayor is fantastic. Now the governor of the state of Maryland is Black. Like, it is just part of his world. I think that sometimes we forget as we leave Virginia Tech and we get out into the larger world that for many who are here, like, it breaks my heart to hear that you didn't have the experience of a queer elder because we are here. But if we as alumni are not showing up here, it creates a vacuum. And that's what's so important about the next 50 years of queer and trans at Virginia Tech is we need to show up because we've been here for a long time. We don't need to hide.
It, like, going to the Lapide like recent meeting, I'd say it was one of the best parts of my semester so far because of that sense of community that I didn't even know I could have access to.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important. And that's why it's so important to capture the voices. And I think capture the voices of all the generations, because particularly for students now are experiencing a world that those of us who were here at Tech 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was very different. Like, our act of rebellion was wearing jeans. And we just wanted to be left alone. But often we were left alone. And we don't want that for future generations and for future Hokies. So I think one of the things that's going to be absolutely imperative for alumni for the next 50 years is to not allow additional generations to feel like they're alone.
I wonder if I could jump in with a quick question. You talked about the generational differences between the experiences at Virginia Tech. And so I'm curious, for students today like Anna, how would you communicate what your experience was like during that time? Can you just kind of take us through your first year coming to Virginia Tech? What was that like for you?
So for me, there really wasn't an active queer population here at Tech. There was, in fact, a gay, and I think at the time it was the Gay and Lesbian Society, but nobody talked about it. I think that I don't know that everybody even had the concept of that they were in a closet, because they didn't actually realize that there was a closet. But people who could be perceived as gay or lesbian, they were mocked, they were made fun of, there were slurs. And I think that's still relevant to some of our students today, especially depending upon where they are. It still happens here today in Blacksburg. Not often, but it does happen. I think the big difference from when I was here and when students today, at least I hope, is there were no advocates. Just be quiet. Just sit back. Don't make waves. Don't be who you are. Just hide. And one of the things that I think is so different here is I think this generation in particular is so much more accepting of difference, regardless of difference. And it's one of the intersectionalities that I think is absolutely fascinating to look at. 1991 is when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, which meant that for the first time, people who were different, who thought differently, who were neurodiverse, they had protections. This generation never grew up without those protections. My generation, if you had an issue, you didn't talk about it, whether it was that you were gay, whether it's that you had a disability. And I think it is incumbent upon people of my generation to share what that was like. I remember in Virginia when the law was actually passed that I no longer could be fired for being gay. And I had been in corporate America for about 10 years. That was around the same time period that Virginia finally got rid of that law. So it was in the 2011 to 2014 time. For the first time, I was legal in the state, in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I will also say, though, 2 years later, I moved to Maryland, and I felt for the first time like I could breathe a sigh of relief. And that's some of the thing that the students today still experience is, where do they feel safe, and where do they feel like they need to hide themselves?
If I may, knowing that you're the mother of a queer child, is it on? Okay. Knowing that you're the mother of a queer child, knowing that he came here, and knowing your experience with queer people in your time here, how were you? How did that make you feel? How did you go about that?
So the first thing I'd say is my son would say that he is who he is, and I don't think he ever experienced any issues here at Tech. I would say that for him, it's just part of who he is. And so I didn't really worry too much about him being here. I also investigated what the campus was like here again, because it had been 30 years since I had been here, aside from like football games and stuff. So I wanted to make sure that it felt safe, but that was with every single university. And it was safety, I would say, not because he identifies as bisexual. I would say it's because he is a very different individual, and he is rabidly independent and nonconformist, which and is the sort of person that speaks up when he sees injustice. And so when I thought about him coming to Virginia Tech, that was in the back of my mind, is how will it be, not necessarily when he's on campus, but when he is out in the town? Which the fact that he is now in Southwest Virginia for his job in rural Virginia without any issues, Virginia Tech helped prepare me for feeling more comfortable. But he came in, there is so much more activity here now. The Pride Center is so vibrant. I am part of their newsletter, and they are probably doing 30 events a month. The leadership under Ashley and Dr. Bing is fantastic. So seeing that really made me feel very comfortable, as well as all the other community and cultural centers here. Because when I was at Tech, the only group I remember there was a Black student union. But we didn't actually talk about that. That was for other people. That wasn't for us. Is more like how the university operated. And I think that the university overall, for the most part, has become so much stronger allies and advocates, and creating safe spaces for students wherever they are, that it really helped me feel safe sending him here. The other thing that was really interesting about, and I'll just share this quick vignette, is we toured 4 college campuses. Virginia Tech was the only one that has unlocked academic buildings. The rest were like fortresses. You had to badge in and out to get in and out of every building. Virginia Tech, where the school shooting happened, is still an open campus. And that is, more than anything else, told me that it was the right place.
When I think of our When I think of undergraduate college years, I think of music, TV, and movies as being pop culture things that people bonded over, watched together, listened to together. And I'm wondering if there were songs, movies, TV shows that either depicted queer characters that caused a stir during the time you were an undergrad, a positive stir or a negative stir. Just to take you back to that time period, what were undergrads talking about in the culture related to queer college-age youth?
So that is such a fantastic question, because during the time period that I was coming to Tech, gay was depicted as a particular caricature. You were only a flaming gay man who had fantastic fashion sense, who spoke in a falsetto, and that was the space for gay. So I think in a lot of instances, we looked at some of the things and we said, that's not us. And it's part of the reason why some of us didn't even realize that we identified as queer, is because the representation in movies, on TV, in publications was always a very specific, effeminate man who was always being made fun of. He was always the comic shtick. So if you didn't meet that particular stereotype, you didn't really fit in. So we didn't even realize how jarring, I would say, at least for myself and for some of my friends, we didn't realize how jarring it was, because it was only as we got older and we had more experiences and we met more queer people, we said, that isn't us. And I think all marginalized communities have that experience, whether you are Black, whether you are Asian or Hispanic, Latina, or you are Indigenous, Native American, or South Pacific Islander. There are all of these caricatures, even still today, that show up in the media, and it can be very hard for people to see them and they don't actually relate to that. So I think that was part of my experience when I was here at Tech is we first off, we didn't trust anybody. We were skeptical of everyone and everything. We were very skeptical of the man. So anything that we saw on TV or in papers was always always treated with a grain of salt, and yet we internalized it.
Do you remember any shows or characters or songs or films from that time that even attempted to present a gay character or allude to being queer in college or being queer in the world from that time?
So I don't know if it was while I was in college, but not too long after. We had a lot of comedy shows that had the plucky, funny sidekick friend who was male who happened to be gay. I'm thinking of things as I was starting out in the world, things like Will and Grace. Things like some of the characters in some of the John Hughes' movies where they depicted, because the intersection of gay and nerdy was very close back then. So you had the geeky guy and you had the, well, is he a slur? Is he something else? Or is he just different? So I think there was a lot of that where there was ambiguity. But it's interesting to think about because I can't think of a time period that when we were in college, and this could be that it's been a while, where gay people were depicted in any way positively.
And I just wanted to ask if there were other universities that you know of now or then that were places you visited or heard about as having a healthy, welcoming environment for queer college students.
That's an interesting question because I think when we think about safe and healthy environments, we're not thinking about queer kids. So I don't know that. I think people would assume that any Ivy League, any liberal arts college would be more safe. And places that are religion-based would probably be less safe. But that's also stereotypes. So it's interesting to think about that question. When we think about where it's safe for kids to go to college, we tend to do it on outward physical attributes and gender, and less about who the individual is inside.
Thank you.
All good. I think this is such an interesting line of discussion, especially because nowadays we have a lot more variation and representation for queer individuals.
Yes.
Yes. And I think even just being on campus, so many more people are out than I have ever experienced in my entire life. And so just having that like kind of community where you can see someone like have like a pin on their bag and you're like, oh, that's like a safe person that I can talk to or be friends with me. Like, hey, we experience the same thing. So I think that is such a valuable thing that, especially putting in context with older people that have like gone to tech with that lack, especially for the younger generation to like kind of realize that is such a privilege. And I feel like that's amazing that we have that today.
It is. And I think that one of the programs that Virginia Tech offers, and I think it's run through the Pride Center, or I don't know if they're still offered because things change daily, but one of the things that one of the programs they had was something called Safe Zone, where faculty, administration, people could learn how to be allies. And one of the things that we did at the lavender ceremony is, in addition to getting the cords for the students, is those who had hit a certain level of participation in Safe Zone also got pins. And we actually had them come up person by person to recognize them, because in many ways it was their graduation ceremony too. The more we can support the faculty and staff here I think the better we are. I'd also say, and this is one of the things that I wish alumni could see that identify as queer and trans from Virginia Tech, is I got to watch after December of last year how professors' syllabi changed, how much they made sure, so many professors in so many different colleges, that there was very clear, affirming, inclusive language embedded in their syllabus. And I think it is easy to characterize the entire university by the message that the president or the board of visitors, but that's not who's changing and driving the culture here on campus. It is the students, it is the faculty, and it is the administration. And so one of the things I hope that does not happen is that we somehow interfere in the academic freedom here at Virginia Tech for professors and other staff to be supportive and inclusive, so that no matter what, we truly are living our values.
I know, at least from my experience looking through the syllabus, I have seen that. And it has just been just kind of like a weight lifted off my shoulders whenever I see that. Because I've never been in an environment where it's just so positive in relation to being a safe space for queer individuals, or even like people of color as well. Just speaking support, it makes such a difference.
It does, and I actually think that's one of the really important things. So there are two communities that by and large can pass. Those with individual disabilities and those who identify as queer or transgender, especially for those who identify as queer. It is incumbent upon us to make sure those who have physical differences are also supported and included, and calling out bias. And I think that's one of the things that will be very important for the queer and transgender communities to recognize, is how to support. And also, there is discrimination and bias within the queer and transgender community. A lot of people think transgender, but there's a lot in relation to whether you're bisexual or asexual and being accepted. When I started a Pride chapter at one of my employers, at one point, I had somebody tell me that didn't think that I should be starting and running a Pride chapter because I was bisexual, and one of my partners at the time was male. Therefore, I wasn't really gay. And I think that that's something that continues to exist, and something that the queer and trans community need to recognize, is we have to be very careful to not become that which we fight against. And it is not we fight for our rights at the exclusions of others. A rising tide lifts all boats. We need to make sure that all of the community and cultural centers here and everyone feels included and welcome.
Yes, I've definitely seen a lot of discourse of infighting within the queer community, and kind of like being spokespeople for like the ideals that we're supposed to be fighting against. And I feel like, especially, I used to identify as bisexual. I now realize I was a lesbian. But that intersectionality of like being accepted or not, whether like on the difference of like who your partner was at the time, I just thought that was so ridiculous. Yeah.
It absolutely is. And we're continually still on an evolution as far as who we are. At this point, I define myself as pansexual because I don't believe that there are just two genders. I believe it is a spectrum. So I identify as pansexual. Other people do not, because they are only attracted to one or two genders, and that is it. But I think the more we ensure that we're creating a welcoming space for everyone, I think the better we get. And I do feel like that's a place that Virginia Tech has evolved and will continue to evolve. the more we have the hard conversations, the more things get easier.
I think especially with having student organizations like run by students, creating like safe spaces by students for students. I know like of QTPOC, queer and trans people of color, and the space community, which is for asexual people and aromantic people. I feel like just having spaces where people can see themselves in other people and have that experience not be like they're no longer invisible even within their own community. And so I feel like just having that ability to create students spaces to kind of lessen that barrier is super important.
100%. And that's what's so important about the community and culture centers here at Virginia Tech. It is where people feel safe, where they can explore, and also where they can expose people who are not part of that community to more things. So it is my fervent hope that the cultural centers continue, whatever they are called. If the underlying mission doesn't change, I think it's absolutely critical.
I wonder if I could jump in. You mentioned earlier and during our pre-interview that your father was a civil rights advocate, right? But people are complex, and he was an alcoholic and an abusive man. And I guess I'm just curious, where does your advocacy come from? Is there an influence from him as far as like human rights? And I normally only ask one question at a time, but we're passing around the mic, so I'm going to get it in. How did your father respond to you coming out? Or your parents, your family?
My father had passed before I came out. My mother didn't understand. She told me she loved me no matter what, but she had no understanding of what I was talking about because it wasn't in our frame of reference. Because I am married to a man, therefore I'm just normal. I would say probably the keystone event for me in my journey to be as a better ally as much as I can and to continually look to do that was the part of Pennsylvania where I grew up had a statue of a Confederate soldier in the town square. And I was in Pennsylvania. When I was about 4 or 5, a black family moved in to the farm next to us. And the KKK showed up and they burnt a cross in the field between our farmhouse and theirs. And my father and mother, who were both very involved in marginalized communities, made sure that we became friends. But with the kids who were a couple years younger than we were, I was the only person that was willing to be their friend in the entire elementary school. I was the person who went to their house and played with their kids and invited them up. And seeing the struggle and hearing the negative comments that were being made, it stuck with me. And it made me so angry because they were just amazing people. And they left after a year and they moved somewhere else where there was a larger, more diverse population. I think that stuck with me. It made me so angry. And I think that happening when I was about 4 or 5 years old cemented in me, I was the white girl. If a white girl wasn't inviting black people and black kids into their home and into their school and into their lives, no one else was going to. And that became stop looking for somebody else to solve a problem. It's on me. And that really cemented to me a lot of things. I would say having a kid that was around the same age as Trayvon Martin also did. Having a kid who was the exact same age for Sandy Hook, for Parkland, all of that shaped me, and made me very present to, you can't rely on other people to make the world a better place. It's on you. And until my father died, he was 1000% supportive of anything that I was doing from an activism and civil rights perspective. So I think he would have been very accepting. Even if he wouldn't have understood it, he would have been totally fine with it. And my mother, if she had been more lucid at the time, I think would have been as well. But I owe so much to the example that my father set. And it's a very good example of how I think we need to be to get past these times. Was my father perfect? No. But that doesn't mean he wasn't also an amazing human being. And we want to create little boxes to put people in. We want to define, this is what queer means, this is what trans means. And we want our world to be safe and controlled and be in those boxes. And the world isn't that way. We are not going to get through a lot of the challenges we have if we are not willing to stop demonizing the other.
Sorry, Anna. You also mentioned to me that within your corporate life, you oftentimes were the only woman in the room, the only person who identified as queer. Can you talk about your journey from coming out as a new, shiny Hokie into the corporate world, and how those experiences at Tech guided you through your career and led to your advocacy for other groups?
So one of the things that helped me with Virginia Tech was I had a lot of work study. I had a lot of work study credits. As a matter of fact, I had a higher amount than what I could actually work in a year. And I got 2 opportunities. One was I worked in the geology department as a lab assistant. So I had like the sciencey techie side. I learned to talk STEM through that experience. And then I also worked at the event planning office. And I had a fantastic, amazing mentor and shining example of someone who I could hopefully one day emulate, who worked there at the time. Her name was Clarissa Morton. And she was absolutely fantastic. She gave me opportunities. As a matter of fact, one of the things that she did between my junior and senior year is I stayed in Blacksburg for the summer. And the person who was one of the office managers had another opportunity elsewhere on campus doing his dream job for the summer. And rather than hire somebody else or hire a temp, she said, "Do you want to work here?" And somehow this woman knew exactly how much I needed to make over the summer so that I only had to work one job my final semester in college. And because of that, and because she was constantly giving me more information, she was constantly saying, here's why this event can't happen on campus. Here's why we can't approve this. Here's what we can approve. She was providing the structure and the analytics of how do you handle people and logistics and planning and project management. Those were honestly more than what I was experiencing in the classroom. That prepared me for corporate life. So I started my job and I just had experiences that other people didn't. And because Clarissa would bring me into meetings sometimes where, the head of the university unions and student activities, as it was called at the time, and I was another person on her staff. I never felt odd about people in positions of power because she helped with that. And so I think those experiences were absolutely invaluable that I got from Tech to prepare me for the rest of the world. The other thing, and going back to the academics, in particular the history department, One of the things that the history department did, and I'm sure still does, but I'm not a student, is you have to step back and look at causality. And as soon as you think you found the root cause of why something exists, congratulations, you start over and you keep digging again and you keep digging again. And how that translated in corporate America is it is very important to think strategically and to be able to go from the 1,000-foot view out to 30,000 feet and back. My history degree and the professors I had forced me to gain that skill. That was absolutely invaluable in corporate America. And I had mentioned earlier that a lot of the executives have liberal arts degrees. A lot of them had poli-sci or history or philosophy that they ended up getting because they had the business, they had the STEM, they didn't have the strategy and sometimes the leadership empathy. So it was that combination that I had when I started here at Tech absolutely prepared me for corporate America.
Dr. Higgins, do you mind talking a little bit about the history department in relation to what was just said?
Well, sure. Well, you know this, but Jennifer Hart, in the chair of the history department, is really supporting this project, and the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, Laura Belmonte, also really supports this project, and it stems from what other alumni saw as a gap within the collection. So we're hoping to record more diverse stories across different generations. I've also heard, like, in the past that professors weren't always supportive of LGBTQ plus students. And I'm curious if that resonates with your experience here, or did you have mostly supportive professors?
I don't recall any one professor that mentioned anything about gay or trans.
That's a lack of support in itself, though, isn't it?
It is.
Mm.
It is. I would say that there were pockets where there were fierce advocates. In the English department, we had Nikki Giovanni. In the history department, one of the people who really challenged me to think was a professor who taught the history of Appalachia, Crandall Shiflett. And also, people talk a lot in the history department about James Robertson Jr. I would say what I learned from Dr. Robertson was that I wasn't in the North anymore, and I was now in the South, which I was born in Maryland. I was raised in Pennsylvania for some time, and the War of Northern Aggression was a statement I had never heard before. But he taught me to listen to what he was actually saying and not what he was verbalizing, which was communicating how much the South had become ingrained. So I would say a lot of professors weren't necessarily vocal advocates, but they gave us the framework for us to be the advocates that sometimes they either didn't even realize that they wanted to be or were. But I don't think there was anybody that I can recall that was very openly supportive specifically to queer and trans. When I was in college, there was no such thing as trans. Also, there was no such thing as bisexual, to be fair, or asexual. So I think that a lot of it was there were professors that accepted people who, however they were. And I think those were the professors that were very, very meaningful.
If I may, today we see a lot of professors receiving backlash for going against what the school is imposing, and there are awful consequences, or we've seen that there have been. Was there any parallel to that in your time of being a student when it came to standing up for movements that really wasn't typically going along with what the university had said.
So I would say I'm actually going to share a story about a professor who was in geology. And it's a place where Virginia Tech could have walked away, and they didn't. There was a professor in the geology department that had a theory about the extinction of the dinosaurs. And there was another very prominent geologist who was supported by a very prominent father who worked on the Manhattan Project, who had a different theory for how the dinosaurs died. And so he started a smear campaign against the professor here at Virginia Tech. And when I say smear campaign, they actively tried to destroy his life, destroy his credibility. If there was an event or there was a speech or there was a grad student associated with this professor, they made it their mission to try to derail, ridicule, and demean, and went on an active campaign to get Virginia Tech to fire this tenured professor, all because he had a different theory. Virginia Tech didn't fire him. I'm not saying Virginia Tech did everything right, because I think they could have been stronger advocates of him than they were. But it was an example that I saw where professors had the academic freedom to speak and to publish freely. And no matter the opposition, they did not cave. And the other side was very well connected because the father had worked on the Manhattan Project. And so they attempted to get this professor barred from things like the National Science Foundation, from presenting at geologic conferences, tried to get him barred and have him declared mentally incompetent. And Virginia Tech stood by him the whole way through. So when I think about Virginia Tech even then, I think I would hope that when they can, where they can, they have the faculty's backs. Because the day that dies, the day Virginia Tech becomes just another university, it's just a place to get a piece of paper. It's not a university. It's not a community. And it is my hope that that continues here at Tech, particularly in this current environment where it would be so easy to let go of professors who study things like women and gender identity, like disability, like African studies. It would be the easy route, but it isn't the right route. And I do think the university is at an inflection point, as are all universities right now. And hopefully they will continue to support academic freedom, diversity of thought, diversity of people, and continue to ensure that the professors and the administrators have the support, because they can't be strong advocates to the students if they don't have that support. We're supposed to challenge at the university level. We're supposed to ask questions. We're supposed to debate. If we're not doing that, then we're failing as an institution.
I wonder if you could offer insights or lessons from your own experiences organizing or advocating for other people within your career field. What are some key takeaways that students today might be able to apply to their own lives?
So I think one of the first ones that I alluded to in the commencement speech is, if you see that something is needed, don't wait around for somebody else to do it. Build it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% baked out. Pursue it from the heart. But also, one of the most important things that I learned, and that I think that anybody, particularly in academia and the students, need to know, is there's a expression in the disability community: nothing about us without us. One of the most critical things as you move forward, as you move into leadership, as you move into exploring and becoming the subject matter of your field, is to ensure that you don't add in the hubris of telling people and being the person who tells them what to do and what it is that they need. Having a insatiable, continual, lifelong curiosity and learning is absolutely critical. I think also anybody that can should be taking public speaking and communication skills. Absolutely critical. There's a lot of fear about AI and ChatGPT. And the world is going to look different from a career perspective for students today than it was 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. Applying that continual learning, continual questioning, improving communication are absolutely going to be important. And if you have an opportunity to ever work in an institution that has community and employee resource centers, join every one. Don't just join the one that you're affiliated with. Sit there and be the only person that looks like you in that room, and be comfortable with being a minority in those circumstances, because you will learn so much. But when you're there to learn. You're not there to speak, to lecture, or to save. And those are the more you can stop, listen, learn, the better equipped you will be regardless of your field.
Those are all wonderful pieces of advice. Can you tell me of any experience where you've, in your own advocacy, received pushback and how you've had to deal with that?
That is a fantastic question. Every day. If you are supporting things that go against the status quo, one of the things that I did when I worked at Capital One for about 15 years. And one of the things that I discovered was there was a Pride chapter, but it was in Richmond. And there wasn't one at the headquarters in McLean where I was located, and there was no need. And we had multiple instances where I was hearing from gay and queer folk in Richmond where the Pride events posters were being torn down, where slurs were being used casually in an office environment. And so what I did is I decided to help co-found a chapter at headquarters for gay LGBTQ+ people who worked at the headquarters. And I did that because it was so easy for HR that was located in headquarters and for senior leaders to think, well, that's just a problem in one location. It's not a problem, but it's an example of the culture. So I advocated, and there was pushback, and not necessarily from the leadership. The leadership actually was absolutely supportive, but that next layer down was like, why do we need this? People tell you no all the time. Sometimes it is better to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. The other thing is just because somebody said no once doesn't mean they're always going to say no. And sometimes it is how you're delivering the ask or how you're delivering the request that gets people to a no. One of the first things I learned when I just started out at my very first job was an expression that somebody used, which is, people don't shoot holes in boats that they are in. So get people in your boat And if they're in your boat and they don't know that you're in your boat, your job is to show them that they are in fact in your boat. So think about every time you say no. That was when I was 22 years old. I got that advice. And that became my mantra of if something was a no, I would ask why. And at times I could be that annoying person that kept on asking why. But it gave me the opportunity to say, how can we get to yes? Or how can we get to something that by the time we end is even better than what I had imagined initially? You have to be willing to keep true to your moral compass, ensure that you stay very closely hewed. And going back to my story about Nelson Mandela, when Nelson Mandela was in prison, he was insulted, he was belittled, he was assaulted. He never gave up his view for a just and equitable society where everyone could survive and thrive. Even when his fellow members of the African National Congress wanted to push for retribution and violence, he refused because the view that he was advocating was so core to his being. And that is where, if you have your North Star, your moral compass, it guides you all through life. I will tell you that Nelson Mandela is not an easy role model, because sometimes I really just want to be angry and really just want to say, these people are unreasonable. I have to stop trying to talk to them. But he was in prison for 30 years and he never gave that up. So I'm not in prison. I need to suck it up and figure out ways to adjust my style to get to the better world. And sometimes that does mean leaving a place that feels like home. I eventually left a company, not necessarily by my choice initially, because their values and their morals changed. And I learned that what is most important wherever you are is you have to have a good fit from a culture and your personal standards. So if you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're trying to get something accomplished and you're constantly getting no, one of the things you need to do is step back and say, am I in the right place? But if you are in the right place, then it is, how do I get to where we need to be? Not focusing sometimes on that end perfection, but what's the incremental step we can take to slowly get there over time.
That resilience and commitment to change is really, really admirable. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Especially when it comes to connecting that with your previous ideals of staying true to your experience and your want for protection of other people. I feel like just seeing that is so inspiring. So I really appreciate that.
It's what inspired me to start the fund at Virginia Tech, is because candidly, I didn't like the rhetoric coming out of the governor's office in Richmond. And so every year I write that check. And I'm going to be honest, every year I send in that money, I laugh, because no matter what a politician wants, my people are going to be supported here at Tech. And those are the little things, those little acts of rebellion, which are also acts of compassion. Those are what sustain us. Those are what give us hope. And that's where we need to continue to focus. It's one of the things that if I think about the next 50 years at Tech, I really want to see us continue as alumni to be that voice of hope, to be that voice of advocacy, and at times to be dissidents in order to ensure that our community is taken care of.
Does anyone else have any questions? Is there anything else you would like to share that you've kind of talked about previously?
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay.
I mean, I could talk for hours, but that's just me.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. I very much really appreciate the time that we spent together.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.